The Arizona Territory, 1887. Scorched earth stretched as far as the eye could see. Thomas Running Water stood alone on the cracked, dusty land that was now his, the village everyone called Cursed. A place where wells ran dry and crops withered overnight. The other Apache had warned him, the settlers had mocked him, and the Indian agent had practically given the deed away with a smirk. But Thomas saw something in this forsaken place that others missed. A memory from his grandfather's stories about what lay beneath the sacred ground. Could this barren wasteland truly hold the salvation of his people? Or would the curse claim him too? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if the story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Thomas Running Water adjusted the worn medicine pouch around his neck, the leather soft from decades of wear. Inside rested small stones, dried herbs, and a pinch of soil from each place he had called home. Soon, he would add earth from this desolate patch of land, his newest and perhaps final home. At 56, the lines on his face told stories of both hardship and dignity. His tall frame remained strong despite the years, though he now walked with a slight limp, a reminder of his time scouting for the U.S. Army. Those years had taught him to read not just tracks but people, a skill that served him well in navigating between two worlds that rarely understood each other. "You've finally lost your mind completely, old man," his son Joseph had said when Thomas announced his acquisition of the abandoned village. The hurt in the young man's eyes cut deeper than his words. "We had enough for a small ranch by the river. Now we have nothing but cursed dirt." Thomas hadn't argued. How could he explain that sometimes wisdom came as a whisper, not a shout? That his grandfather's stories about this place had planted seeds in his mind decades ago? He reached the center of what had once been the village square. Adobe buildings stood in various states of decay, their walls crumbling back into the earth. The government had moved most of the Apache here 20 years ago, then relocated them again when the wells failed. Unsuitable for habitation, the report had stated. The perfect excuse to push his people onto even smaller parcels of land. Thomas knelt and pressed his palm against the parched ground. Grandfather had spoken of water that once flowed here, of gardens that bloomed even in summer heat, of something precious the earth held in trust. "You paid good money for worthless land?" Indian agent Simmons had sneered when finalizing the transaction, clearly believing he'd swindled Thomas. The debt had been modest. Thomas had given up their savings meant for the river ranch. But the agent's smug satisfaction suggested he thought himself clever for unloading this worthless property. The land was silent now as Thomas walked its boundaries, memorizing its contours. To the west, distant mountains rose blue against the horizon. To the east, the hazy outline of Mason Harding's sprawling ranch, where water rights had been stolen through paperwork Thomas's people couldn't read. The nearby white settlement of Coopersville had grown fat on Apache land and government contracts. As the sun began its descent, Thomas stopped at the ancient well in the center of the village. Long dry, it had been covered with heavy stones. This would be where he would start. This would be where he would honor the old ways first before anything else. He removed his hat, closed his eyes, and began to speak softly in Apache. Not a prayer exactly, but a request for permission, an introduction of himself to the land, a promise of respectful stewardship. The wind picked up slightly, swirling dust around his feet. In the distance, a coyote called, its lonely howl echoing across the emptiness. Thomas opened his eyes and nodded once. He would make camp in the most intact of the buildings and begin work at dawn. As he unpacked his meager supplies, Thomas's thoughts turned to his late wife, Emma Flower in Snow. Tuberculosis had taken her 5 winters ago. She would have understood his decision to claim this place, would have seen beyond its apparent desolation. Their son Joseph, angry and practical, could only see what was visible on the surface. "I know what I'm doing, my son," Thomas whispered to the darkening sky. "There is more here than meets the eye. Your grandfather knew it. I know it. Someday you will know it too." He built a small fire and watched the flames dance against the encroaching darkness. Tomorrow he would begin the work of reclaiming what had been abandoned. Not just adobe walls and a dry well, but something deeper. Something that belonged to his people and had been waiting patiently for their return. Thomas reached into his medicine pouch, took a pinch of soil from his birthplace, and cast it to the 4 directions. Then he collected a small amount of earth from this new place and added it to the pouch. The cycle continued. The story grew. Emma Blackwell adjusted her hat against the Arizona sun as her wagon approached the outskirts of Coopersville. At 38, she had long abandoned the idea of starting over. Yet here she was, bouncing along a dusty road to become the new schoolteacher for the Apache reservation. The irony wasn't lost on her that she, a widow from Boston whose husband never returned from Gettysburg, would be teaching children whose fathers had likely fought for the other side in different battles. A faded photograph in her locket showed a younger Emma beside her husband, their faces frozen in sepia-toned optimism. That woman with the bright eyes seemed like a stranger now. The wagon driver, a weathered local man who'd barely spoken during their journey, suddenly gestured toward a distant figure working on what appeared to be a well. "That there's running water," he said, breaking his silence. "Army scout turned madman. Bought the old cursed Apache village last month. Even his own people think he's touched in the head." Emma squinted against the sun. "Cursed. Nothing grows there. Wells run dry. Livestock dies." The driver shrugged. "Been that way long as anyone remembers. They say even the Apache avoided it before the army pushed them there." Emma watched the distant figure methodically removing stones from what appeared to be a well. There was something dignified in his movements, something purposeful that contradicted the driver's assessment. "I'd like to stop, please," she said suddenly. The driver looked at her as if she too might be touched in the head. "Ma'am, we're expected in town before sundown." "Just for a moment," Emma insisted, her Boston accent sharpening with determination. Reluctantly, the driver turned the wagon toward the abandoned village. As they approached, Emma could see adobe structures in various states of disrepair. The man at the well straightened, watching their approach with cautious eyes. Thomas Running Water had been working since dawn, removing the heavy stones that sealed the ceremonial well. When he spotted the approaching wagon, his hand instinctively moved toward the knife at his belt. Visitors rarely brought good news. He was surprised to see a woman in proper Eastern dress step down from the wagon. Her clothing was practical but well-made, her posture straight and confident. Not a missionary's wife, they always traveled in pairs like nervous birds. Not a settler's wife, they never ventured this far alone. "Mr. Running Water," she called, approaching with direct steps. "I'm Emma Blackwell, the new teacher for the reservation school." Thomas nodded once, his expression carefully neutral. "You're a long way from the school, Miss Blackwell." "Mrs.," she corrected gently. "And yes, I suppose I am. Your project caught my attention." A smile almost touched Thomas's lips. "My madness, you mean? That's what they're calling it in town." Emma had the grace to look embarrassed. "People fear what they don't understand." "And what do you understand, Mrs. Blackwell, that brings you to this cursed place?" There was a challenge in his voice, but no hostility. Before she could answer, a cloud of dust on the horizon announced an approaching rider. Thomas's expression darkened as he recognized the horseman. "Mason Harding," he said quietly, "owns most of the water rights around here. Thinks he should own the rest too." Emma watched as a well-dressed man on an expensive horse rode into the village square. Everything about him spoke of money and the expectation of deference. "Running Water," Harding called without dismounting. "Still digging holes in dead ground?" His eyes shifted to Emma, a proprietary assessment that made her stiffen. "Ma'am, you shouldn't be out here. This place has a bad history." "I was just meeting Mr. Running Water," Emma replied coolly. "As the new teacher, I like to know all the families in the area." Harding laughed, a sound without humor. "He's not worth your time, ma'am. None of them are." He turned back to Thomas. "My offer stands. When you're tired of playing with dirt, I'll take this land off your hands. Give you enough to start fresh somewhere more suitable." Thomas met his gaze steadily. "This land is not for sale. Everything has a price," Harding replied. his smile not reaching his eyes. "You'll figure that out." With a tip of his hat to Emma that held no respect, he turned his horse and rode away. The silence that followed felt charged with unspoken history. Emma found herself oddly reluctant to leave. "What are you looking for?" she asked, nodding toward the well. Thomas studied her for a long moment, as if deciding something important. "Life," he finally said. "This place once had water. My grandfather spoke of gardens here, of ceremonies." "And you believe him despite what everyone says?" The ghost of a smile touched Thomas's weathered face. "Some things you feel in your bones, Mrs. Blackwell. Some truths don't need proving." As Emma returned to the waiting wagon, she found herself looking back at the solitary figure resuming his work. There was a story here, deeper than cursed tales and dry wells. For the first time since arriving in the territory, she felt genuinely curious. 3 weeks of backbreaking labor had deepened the well considerably. Thomas wiped sweat from his brow as he examined the unusual soil layers now visible in the morning light. The earth had changed from red-orange to a peculiar gray-black clay that felt different between his fingers, almost greasy. "Father," Joseph's voice called from above. "Someone's coming." Thomas climbed the rope ladder, joints protesting. His son's return 2 days ago had been unexpected, fired from his job at the trading post for causing trouble, which meant he'd likely stood up to someone who deserved it. Though Joseph remained skeptical about his father's project, extra hands were welcome. Emma Blackwell approached on horseback, her school skirts modified practically for riding. Behind her trotted a mule laden with what appeared to be books and rolled papers. "Mrs. Blackwell," Thomas acknowledged with a nod. "Mr. Running Water." She dismounted with practiced ease. "I've brought something that might interest you." Joseph watched with barely concealed suspicion as she untied a large rolled document from the mule's pack. "Territorial survey maps," she explained, spreading them on a flat rock, "and geological reports from the Army Corps of Engineers. I requested them from Phoenix after our conversation." Thomas studied the maps, his eyes drawn to the markings around their location. "What are these lines?" he asked, tracing faded blue markings that converged near the village. "Underground water channels, according to the survey." Emma pointed to notations. "The engineer who drafted this believed there's an aquifer beneath us." Thomas felt a surge of vindication. "My grandfather spoke of rivers beneath the earth." Joseph leaned forward despite himself. "If there's water, why is everything so dry?" Emma pointed to another notation. "The report mentions a subsidence event 25 years ago, an earthquake that might have shifted the channels." Thomas knelt to examine the soil he'd excavated. The layers changed. "I reached clay that doesn't belong." Emma touched the greasy earth. "This isn't just clay." She rubbed it between her fingers, then smelled it. "There's something else here." A thunder of hooves interrupted them. Mason Harding approached with 2 ranch hands, dust billowing behind them. "Well, well," Harding called as he dismounted. "Quite the congregation of fools we have here." Thomas straightened, instinctively positioning himself between Harding and the others. "You're trespassing, Harding." "Am I? Seems I'm doing you a favor, checking on this. What would you call it? Archaeological dig." Harding's laugh held no humor. "Found any buried treasure yet? Running water?" "This is Apache land," Thomas replied evenly. "You have no business here." Harding's smile vanished. "Everything in this territory is my business. You're wasting water that could serve my cattle." He gestured dismissively toward Emma. "And you, ma'am, are wasting education on people who won't use it." Emma's voice was steel wrapped in silk. "I'll decide where my efforts are best spent, Mr. Harding." Harding's eyes narrowed. "You Eastern types always arrive full of noble ideas. Then reality sets in." He turned back to Thomas. "This is your last friendly warning. Abandon this foolishness or face consequences." After Harding departed, Joseph exploded. "That man owns half the county because of papers our people couldn't read. And threat-making," Emma added quietly. "I've heard stories in town." Thomas returned to the well, mind working. "Help me," he said simply. By sunset, they had excavated another 3 feet. Thomas worked with renewed purpose after discovering a smooth stone object buried in the clay, an ancient bowl carved with symbols of flowing water. His grandfather had described such vessels used in rain ceremonies. "Something's wrong with this soil," Joseph noted, examining the slick dark clay coating their tools. Later that night, storm clouds gathered unusually quickly over the desert. Thunder rolled across the sky as Thomas performed a blessing ceremony at the half-excavated well, the ancient bowl filled with rainwater. As he chanted words taught by his grandfather, the ground beneath them trembled. At first, they thought it was thunder until the vibration intensified, focused around the well. "Father!" Joseph called in alarm. The soil around the well shifted. A strange, acrid smell rose from the depths. Then, impossibly, a thick black substance began seeping upward through the clay. "Water?" Joseph asked, bewildered. Thomas touched the viscous liquid, rubbed it between his fingers. It wasn't water. Too thick, too dark, with a sharp, unfamiliar smell. Emma approached, her face illuminated by lightning. She stared at the black substance, then at her fingers after touching it. "Not water," she said, her voice hushed with realization. "Oil. Crude oil." She looked at Thomas with wide eyes, like the strikes back east that made men millionaires overnight. Thomas stared at the black liquid now pooling at his feet. The curse. The reason his grandfather's generation had sealed this well and created stories to keep people away. Not to protect them from something evil, but to protect something valuable from being taken. The curse was a blessing all along, Thomas whispered as rain began to fall. Dawn revealed the true nature of their discovery. The black substance had continued to seep upward overnight, forming a small, shimmering pool beside the well. Thomas carefully filled a small glass bottle with the oil, holding it up to catch the morning light. The liquid was dark amber when thin, almost black when thick, beautiful in its way, and apparently valuable beyond imagining. "We need to keep this quiet," Joseph urged, scanning the horizon nervously. "At least until we understand what it means." Emma nodded agreement. Oil discoveries attract attention, not all of it welcome. In Pennsylvania, men have killed over claims like this. Thomas studied the bottle in his hand. "First, we must speak with the elders. This land and what it holds belongs to all Apache. The Indian agent should be notified," Emma suggested carefully. "For legal purposes." Thomas's expression darkened. "Walter Simmons will try to steal this from us before the words leave our mouths. Then we need to understand our legal position first," Emma insisted. "I have books on territorial law and mineral rights in my quarters. Let me research before we approach anyone official." They agreed to keep the discovery secret for 3 days. Thomas would consult the tribal elders while Emma researched legal precedents. Joseph would continue working the site, disguising their activities as mere well digging. That afternoon, Thomas rode to the main reservation, the bottle of oil carefully wrapped in his saddlebag. The tribal council met in the shade of an old cottonwood tree, the 6 elders listening silently as Thomas explained his discovery. White Hawk, the oldest council member, examined the oil with gnarled fingers. "My grandfather spoke of this black water, said it burned like no other fuel and would someday be worth more than gold." "Did they hide it deliberately?" Thomas asked. Gray Horse nodded slowly. "When the soldiers came, our ancestors knew certain things must be protected. They sealed the wells and created stories to keep both whites and our own people away. The curse was protection," Thomas said softly. "And now you have uncovered what was hidden," Walking Bear added, his tone making it unclear whether this was good or bad. "The question is, what will you do with it?" Thomas outlined his vision, an Apache-controlled operation that would benefit the entire tribe. Schools, clinics, clean water systems, necessities the government had promised but never delivered. The council was divided. Some saw opportunity, others danger. "The whites will never allow Indians to control such wealth," argued Black Kettle. "They will find ways to take it, as they have taken everything else." "Perhaps," Thomas acknowledged, But if we do nothing, we guarantee failure. If we try, we might succeed. After much discussion, the elders agreed to support Thomas conditionally. He would have 1 moon cycle to establish their legal claim before making the discovery public. Meanwhile, Emma immersed herself in legal texts, making notes late into the night by lamplight. The reservation schoolhouse became her research center. Territorial statutes and treaty documents spread across her desk. When a knock came at her door the second evening, she was surprised to find Joseph running water outside, his expression troubled. "There are strangers in town," he reported without preamble. "Men asking questions about my father's land." Emma invited him in, quickly covering her research. "What kind of questions? Why he bought it? What he's found there?" Joseph paced the small room. "Word is spreading already. Who knows about the oil besides us and the council?" "No one should," Joseph frowned. But Simmons visited the reservation today, talking privately with some of the younger men. "Offering jobs, whiskey." Emma sighed. "Dividing the community before we've even begun." Joseph nodded grimly. "He's good at that." The next morning brought Walter Simmons himself to the abandoned village, his wagon raising dust visible from a mile away. Thomas met him at the edge of the property, arms crossed. Simmons didn't bother with pleasantries. "Word is you've struck oil, running water." Thomas's face remained impassive. "Where did you hear such a thing?" "Small reservation. Big ears." Simmons smiled thinly. "I have an offer for you. From interested parties in Phoenix. This land is not for sale." Simmons pulled an envelope from his coat. $5,000. More money than you'll see in your lifetime. Thomas didn't reach for it. "Not interested." "Don't be a fool," Simmons hissed, dropping the friendly pretense. "You think they'll let Apache Indians run an oil operation? The territorial governor will invalidate your claim before you can blink." "We'll see about that," Thomas replied evenly. Simmons's face reddened. "You're making a mistake, running water. A man in your position can't afford mistakes." As Simmons's wagon rolled away, Thomas unclenched his fist, revealing the small bottle of oil he'd been carrying. Their secret was out. Now the real battle would begin. Emma arrived at daybreak, her horse lathered from hard riding. She clutched a worn volume of legal treaties, pages marked with scraps of paper. "News travels fast," she said breathlessly as Thomas helped her dismount. 3 oil company representatives checked into the hotel last night. Thomas nodded grimly. "Simmons was here yesterday with an offer." $5,000, Joseph added, emerging from the dwelling. "For land they called worthless a month ago." Emma opened her book to a marked page. "I've been studying the Treaty of 1858 and territorial statutes on mineral rights. The situation is complicated." They gathered around the rough table Thomas had constructed. Emma traced her finger along legal text that might determine their future. According to the treaty, surface rights were ceded to the Apache Nation, but subsurface mineral rights remain ambiguous. There's precedent for both tribal ownership and federal claim. Thomas frowned. "What does that mean for us?" "It means we need to officially register your claim immediately," Emma explained. "As the deed holder to this specific parcel, you have stronger standing than either the tribe generally or the federal government. But we must file before anyone challenges the original deed." Joseph looked skeptical. "Will territorial officials even accept such a filing from an Apache?" Emma's expression hardened with determination. "They legally must, and I'll be there to ensure they do." Thomas nodded, decision made. "We leave for Phoenix tomorrow." As they prepared for the journey, a wagon approached bearing a well-dressed stranger. Unlike Simmons's aggressive arrival, this visitor moved with deliberate dignity, stopping at a respectful distance. "Mr. Running Water?" The man removed his hat. "Preston Montgomery, representing Western Consolidated Oil. May I speak with you?" Thomas approached cautiously. Montgomery was different from Simmons. Polished, educated, and seemingly genuine in his respect. "I understand you've discovered petroleum deposits," Montgomery said, his eyes taking in the scene with professional assessment. "I'd like to discuss a potential partnership." "Partnership," Thomas repeated, suspicious of the unfamiliar concept in this context. Montgomery smiled. "Yes, unlike my competitors, I don't wish to simply buy your land. I propose a development agreement where Western Consolidated provides equipment and expertise, while you retain ownership and receive a percentage of proceeds." It sounded reasonable, which made Thomas even more wary. "What percentage?" 12% of net profits. Standard in the industry. Joseph scoffed. "On our land, our oil?" Montgomery's smile remained fixed. "The alternative is selling outright or attempting development alone. An expensive proposition requiring technical knowledge and connections to Eastern markets." "We're considering our options," Thomas replied neutrally. "Thank you for your offer." After Montgomery departed, Emma shook her head. 12% is robbery. In Pennsylvania, landowners get at least 25% for productive fields. "How do you know that?" Joseph asked, surprised. "My late husband invested in oil before the war," Emma explained. "I learned more than most women about the business." Thomas studied Emma with new appreciation. Her knowledge might prove as valuable as the oil itself. That evening, as Thomas prepared for their journey to Phoenix, a commotion erupted near the well. He rushed outside to find Joseph confronting 3 men attempting to collect samples of the oil. "This is private property," Joseph shouted, positioning himself between the intruders and the well. "Just having a look," one man replied, his hand hovering near his holster. "Public land, ain't it? Being Indian territory and all." Thomas approached steadily. "This is deeded land, legally purchased. You're trespassing." The standoff might have escalated if not for a rifle shot fired into the air. Emma stood in the doorway, her father's old Springfield steady in her hands. "Gentlemen," she called clearly, "the next shot won't be a warning. Please leave immediately." The men retreated, muttering threats. Once they were gone, Thomas turned to Emma with raised eyebrows. "My father believed women should know how to protect themselves," she explained, lowering the rifle. "The war proved him right." Joseph looked troubled. "They'll be back. With more men." Thomas nodded. "We need guards, men we can trust." He turned to his son. "Speak with your cousins on the reservation. Find those willing to protect what could save our people." That night, Thomas stood under the stars, contemplating how quickly life had changed. A month ago, he'd been ridiculed for accepting cursed land. Now men with money and guns coveted what lay beneath it. As if reading his thoughts, Emma joined him. "We should leave for Phoenix at first light," she said softly. "Every day increases the risk." Thomas studied her in the moonlight, this Eastern woman who had become an unexpected ally. "Why are you helping us, Mrs. Blackwell? This brings you nothing but trouble." Emma was quiet for a moment. "My husband died believing in equality under the law. I came west thinking I could teach children and make a small difference." She gestured toward the well. "This is a chance for real justice, for your people to control their destiny rather than have it decided for them." Again, her words hung in the night air, genuine and unadorned. Thomas felt a connection to this woman that went beyond their shared purpose, a recognition of similar values in an unlikely place. "Tomorrow, then," he said simply. Phoenix. The territorial office in Phoenix buzzed with activity, clerks shuffling papers while prospectors and landowners waited on hard benches. Thomas felt the stares as he entered with Emma, an Apache man and a white woman, an unusual pairing that drew immediate attention. Thomas carried a leather folder containing the deed to his land and their claim documents, meticulously prepared by Emma. The weight of the papers felt slight compared to the importance they held. The clerk at the mineral claims desk barely glanced up. "Next." Emma stepped forward confidently. "We're here to register a petroleum claim on private deeded land." The clerk looked up, his expression shifting from boredom to surprise. His eyes moved from Emma to Thomas, then back again. "You're filing on behalf of," he began. "Mr. Thomas Running Water is filing his own claim," Emma corrected firmly. I'm assisting with the paperwork. The clerk's mouth tightened. Indians don't file mineral claims. There is no law prohibiting it, Emma countered, placing a dog-eared copy of territorial statutes on the counter. Section 18, paragraph 4 specifically states that any deed holder of legal age may register mineral claims on property to which they hold clear title. A small crowd had gathered, watching the exchange with interest. The clerk's face reddened. "Wait here," he muttered, taking their documents to a back office. While they waited, Thomas noticed a wall display of newspaper clippings about regional development. A fresh article caught his eye. Apache oil strike rumored. Investors scramble. The story mentioned unconfirmed reports of a significant petroleum discovery on Apache land, with quotes from Mason Harding calling for government intervention to ensure proper development of resources. Thomas showed it to Emma, who frowned. "Harding's laying groundwork to challenge your claim." The clerk returned with an older man in a formal suit, the registrar himself. "Mr. Running Water," the registrar said with forced politeness, "your paperwork appears in order, but this is an unusual situation. There will need to be a review before formal registration." "On what grounds?" Emma demanded. "Procedural review only," the registrar assured them, not meeting their eyes. "Standard for all new petroleum claims." Thomas knew it was a lie, but arguing would accomplish nothing. "How long will this review take?" 30 days, perhaps longer." Emma started to object, but Thomas touched her arm gently. "We will return in 30 days, he said with dignity. "Please provide written confirmation of our submission date." Outside, Emma fumed. "They're deliberately delaying, hoping someone with more influence will challenge your claim." "Yes," Thomas agreed calmly, "but we have established our intent legally. That counts for something." Their return journey took them through Coopersville, where they found the small town transformed. New faces filled the saloon, and a hastily erected tent city housed prospectors and oil speculators. Signs advertised Apache oil shares and investment opportunities in Indian territory. "They're selling what they don't own," Emma said incredulously. At the general store, the proprietor handed Thomas a stack of messages. Offers from 6 different oil companies and 2 mining syndicates, all requesting meetings. More troubling was a letter from the reservation school board, addressed to Emma. It stated concerns about her excessive involvement in business matters and questionable associations that might undermine her moral authority as an educator. Emma crumpled the letter, her expression a mixture of anger and hurt. "They're threatening my position." Thomas felt a surge of protectiveness. "Because of me. Because you're helping an Apache. Because I'm helping you assert rights they prefer you didn't know you had," Emma corrected. "This isn't just about prejudice. It's about money." When they finally reached the village, they found significant changes. Joseph had organized a rotating guard of young Apache men, armed and vigilant. Several tribal families had moved to the outskirts of the property, establishing a small community of support. Most surprisingly, Joseph had constructed a rudimentary collection system for the seeping oil, using barrels and a hand-dug channel. "We've collected 8 barrels so far," he reported proudly. "And the flow is increasing." Thomas nodded approval. "Any trouble?" "Some. Nitriders tried to approach 2 nights ago. We fired warning shots." Joseph grinned. They were braver in town than on dark reservation land. That evening, tribal elders visited to hear about the Phoenix trip. Thomas shared what had happened at the territorial office, carefully tempering expectations. "They will try every trick," he explained. "But we have followed their law, and we will continue to do so. Meanwhile, we'll strengthen our position here." White Hawk, eldest of the council, studied Thomas thoughtfully. "You speak of their law as if it matters." "It matters because they believe it matters," Thomas replied. "We must use every tool available, their laws and our determination." As the elders departed, Emma lingered, gazing at the newspaper clipping from Phoenix. "Your story is spreading. It won't be long before national papers pick it up." Thomas considered this. "Good or bad?" "Both," Emma said honestly. Attention brings pressure, but also protection. Anonymous Apache claims are easily buried. Headlines are harder to ignore. As if to emphasize her point, a distant rider approached at speed. Joseph tensed, but Thomas recognized the man. Dr. Franklin Hayes, a geologist who occasionally consulted for the Army. Running water, Hayes called, dismounting energetically. I came as soon as I heard. Is it true? You found oil? Dr. Hayes moved with boyish enthusiasm despite his gray beard and spectacles. A geologist by training and explorer by nature, he had mapped much of the territory for the Army Corps of Engineers. Remarkable, he murmured, examining the oil seep. Absolutely remarkable. He collected samples in small glass vials, muttering scientific terms as he worked. Thomas watched patiently as Emma explained their situation. The claim filing, the delays, the growing pressure. The territorial office is stalling, Hayes confirmed, not looking up from his work. Standard procedure when powerful interests want time to maneuver. What can we do? Emma asked. Hayes straightened, excitement visible behind his scholarly demeanor. Scientifically document everything. I can provide an expert assessment that would be difficult for officials to dismiss. He held a vial of oil to the light. This appears to be high-grade crude, minimal sulfur content. Potentially very valuable. Thomas felt a cautious hope. You would testify to this officially? I follow evidence, not politics, Hayes replied. And the evidence here is extraordinary. Over the next 2 weeks, the village transformed further. Hayes conducted a proper geological survey, driving stakes to mark what he believed was the extent of the oil field. Joseph and his team improved the collection system, stockpiling barrels of crude. Thomas commissioned architectural drawings for community improvements, a proper school, a clinic, modern wells. The sketches represented hope made tangible, passing from hand to hand among tribal members who visited with increasing frequency. Word spread through the reservation, drawing more Apache families to help. What had begun as Thomas's solitary quest was becoming a community endeavor. Children played in the spaces between new shelters, and cooking fires burned each evening. Emma divided her time between school duties and the oil field, facing increasing coldness from white residents of Coopersville. The school board had scheduled a review of her position for the following month. One evening, as Thomas and Emma sorted through Hayes's geological reports, their conversation drifted to personal matters. You never speak of your late husband, Thomas observed. Emma's fingers paused on a document. David was an idealist. He believed the Union cause was about equality for all men, not just political unity. Her voice softened with memory. He would have understood what we're doing here. Thomas nodded, understanding the comparison. And you? What does Emma Blackwell believe in? She met his eyes directly. That words on paper, laws, treaties, deeds should mean something. That promises should be kept. Her gaze held his. That a man like you deserves the same opportunities as any other. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken connection. Thomas felt an unexpected lightness in his chest, a feeling he'd thought long buried with his wife. The moment broke as Joseph burst into the dwelling, his expression dark. Riders coming. At least 10 men. Thomas rose immediately. Get everyone to safety. Outside, Thomas counted 12 mounted men approaching, Mason Harding in the lead. Behind him rode Walter Simmons and several ranch hands. They stopped at the edge of the property, Harding surveying the changed landscape with obvious displeasure. Quite the operation you've built, running water, he called. On questionable legal ground. Thomas stood firm. My deed is clear. My claim has been filed. Harding smirked. Interesting you should mention that. I've just come from Phoenix with news. He pulled an official-looking document from his coat. Executive order from the territorial governor, suspending all new mineral claims pending review of reservation boundaries. Simmons stepped forward, clearly enjoying himself. This area may be reclassified as federal land, in which case your deed would be invalidated. That's impossible, Emma protested, joining Thomas. The reservation boundaries were established by treaty. Treaties can be reviewed, Simmons replied smugly, especially when significant resources are involved. Hayes emerged from his tent, introducing himself with professional authority. As a federal geological surveyor, I must inform you that interfering with an ongoing scientific assessment is prohibited. Harding's confidence faltered slightly at Hayes's official status. We're not interfering, Doctor. Simply delivering legal notice. Which I've received, Thomas said evenly. Is there anything else? Frustrated by the lack of confrontation, Harding turned his horse. This isn't over running water. That oil will flow east one way or another. After they departed, Joseph exhaled tensely. They're not just using paper now. Harding's men have been asking about our security, our numbers. Violence next, Thomas murmured. We should request federal marshals, Emma suggested. Hayes shook his head. Marshals report to the same territorial officials who are delaying your claim. Thomas studied the document Harding had delivered. The language was complex, but the intent was clear. A coordinated attempt to undermine Apache rights using legal machinery. We continue as planned, Thomas decided. But we must accelerate. Joseph organized teams to fill more barrels. Dr. Hayes, complete your assessment as quickly as possible. He turned to Emma. We need to find a buyer for our first shipment. Someone beyond local influence. That night, Thomas felt a familiar tightness in his chest. A pain he'd experienced occasionally since his army days. He sat alone outside, controlling his breathing as his father had taught him, refusing to let his body betray the cause now. Emma found him there, immediately concerned. Thomas? Are you ill? It will pass, he assured her, though the pain suggested otherwise. Just tired. She clearly didn't believe him but respected his privacy. Instead, she sat beside him, their shoulders nearly touching as they gazed at the stars. We're making history, she said softly. Whatever happens, remember that. Thomas nodded, the pain slowly subsiding. History remembers victory, not noble attempts. Then we'd better win, Emma replied, her quiet determination a balm more effective than any medicine. Emma was returning from the schoolhouse, her mind on the letter of dismissal she'd received that morning, when she noticed Walter Simmons's wagon outside Mason Harding's ranch house. Normally, this wouldn't merit attention. The two men's alliance was hardly secret, but the presence of Preston Montgomery's distinctive carriage alongside them raised questions. Acting on instinct, Emma directed her horse into a grove of cottonwoods overlooking the ranch house veranda. From this vantage, she could observe without being seen. The three men sat reviewing documents, their conversation carrying on the still air. Emma strained to hear fragments. The grandfather clause is clear, Montgomery was saying. Once resource extraction begins, the land reverts to federal oversight. Simmons nodded smugly. It's in the original deed transfer, paragraph 14, subsection C. Running Water never had it translated properly. And he has no idea? Harding asked. None, Simmons confirmed. Few people know about these clauses. They were strategically inserted into certain deeds. Emma's blood ran cold. She waited until the men moved inside, then rode hard for the village, dust billowing behind her. She found Thomas reviewing Hayes's latest findings, which were remarkable. The geologist now estimated the oil field extended at least 2 miles in 3 directions, potentially the largest strike in the territory. Thomas, she interrupted urgently, I need to see your original deed, the complete document. Puzzled, Thomas retrieved the deed from his trunk. Emma spread it on the table, rapidly scanning the dense legal text, her finger moving down the page until she found what she feared. Here, she pointed. It's hidden in legal language, but it says that any commercial resource extraction triggers a review and potential return of the land to federal authority. Thomas stared at the words. What does that mean for us? It means they've been planning to steal this land all along, Emma explained, her voice tight with anger. These clauses were inserted into deeds for properties they suspected might contain resources. They let Indians buy seemingly worthless land, knowing they could reclaim it if anything valuable was found. Thomas's face hardened. Can they enforce this? Possibly, Emma admitted. But not if we fight it legally. This was deceptive practice. You weren't provided translation or explanation of these terms. That evening, as they discussed strategies, a territorial marshal arrived with formal papers. The documents cited the clause Emma had discovered, declaring Thomas's operation illegal and ordering cessation of all oil collection. This land is now under federal jurisdiction, the marshal explained, uncomfortable but determined. I'm instructed to post these notices and inform you that any continued extraction constitutes theft of government resources. Thomas accepted the papers with outward calm. We will respond through legal channels. After the marshal departed, Joseph exploded. Legal channels? They're using their own corrupt laws against us. Yes, Thomas agreed. But we will use their laws too, and public opinion. The next morning brought worse news. Dr. Hayes arrived breathlessly at dawn, clutching a telegram. The Geological Survey Office in Washington has ordered me to submit all findings directly to them, he explained. They've explicitly forbidden me from providing you copies. Thomas absorbed this latest blow stoically. What can you tell us before surrendering your findings? Hayes glanced around nervously, then spoke quickly. The field is much larger than I initially thought. Potentially the most significant strike in the Southwest. It extends well beyond your land, but the primary access point appears to be the ancestral well you uncovered. This revelation was both blessing and curse. The oil's value made their fight worthwhile but would also intensify efforts to seize control. The situation deteriorated further that afternoon when Joseph returned from town with troubling news. Simmons is meeting with young men from the reservation, he reported, offering cash for signatures on some kind of petition. Emma frowned. What petition? Claiming Thomas doesn't represent tribal interests, Joseph explained bitterly. That the tribe would prefer government management of the oil with fair compensation to all Apache families. Thomas shook his head. Dividing us against ourselves. The oldest tactic. He walked outside, needing space to think, when a stabbing pain shot through his chest. Far worse than before. He gasped, clutching at a post for support. The world swam before him as he struggled to breathe. Emma found him moments later, collapsed on the ground. Thomas! Joseph helped carry his father inside as Emma loosened his clothing, her movements efficient despite her fear. Thomas drifted in and out of consciousness, aware of voices but unable to respond. He needs a doctor, Emma insisted. The nearest doctor who'd treat an Apache is in Tucson, Joseph replied, his voice tight with worry. Then we use traditional medicine first, Emma decided. Send for the tribal healer. As Thomas lay recovering that evening, Joseph made a discovery while reorganizing his father's papers. Beneath a stack of documents lay a brittle, yellowed hide, an ancient map marked with symbols of water and fire, clearly showing the area around their village. Joseph brought it to Thomas's bedside. Father, what is this? Thomas struggled to focus. My grandfather's. He said it showed the rivers beneath the earth. The map depicted underground channels converging beneath the village, but also showed symbols for what they now recognized as oil deposits, extending in precisely the pattern Hayes had identified. This proves they knew, Emma whispered. Your ancestors understood exactly what was here. Joseph studied the map with growing excitement. And why they created the curse story. Not from fear, but to protect it until the right time. Thomas nodded weakly. The curse was a guardian. My grandfather didn't tell me everything, but he made sure I received this land when the time was right. This changes everything, Emma said. It proves ancestral knowledge and deliberate stewardship of the resource. As Thomas drifted into sleep, exhausted by illness and revelation, Joseph and Emma exchanged determined looks over the ancient map that might save their cause. If Thomas lived to see it through, 3 days passed with Thomas drifting between consciousness and shadow. The tribal healer, an elderly woman named Singing Bird, remained by his bedside, using traditional medicines and prayers. Emma assisted, applying cool cloths to his forehead when fever took him, helping him sip broth during moments of lucidity. Joseph kept the oil operation running despite the legal notices, refusing to concede. Each night, more Apache families arrived, bringing food, medicine, and support. The village that had once been cursed and abandoned now hummed with determined activity. On the fourth morning, Thomas woke clear-eyed for the first time. He found Emma asleep in a chair beside his bed, her hand resting near his. For a moment, he simply watched her, this remarkable woman who had risked everything to help him. "You should rest properly," he said softly. Emma startled awake, relief flooding her face. "Thomas, how do you feel?" "Weak," he admitted. "But my mind is clear." Singing Bird examined him, nodding with cautious approval. "The shadow has passed for now," she pronounced. "But it waits nearby. You must rebuild your strength slowly." Thomas chafed at the limitation, but his body left him no choice. He could barely sit up without assistance. For a man accustomed to self-reliance, this enforced weakness was another kind of pain. Joseph entered, his face lighting up when he saw his father conscious. "The others need to see you," he said after a warm greeting. "To know you're recovering." Thomas nodded. "Help me outside." Despite Emma's protests, Thomas insisted on being carried to a chair on the porch, where tribal members could see him. Word spread quickly, and people gathered at a respectful distance, many bringing small gifts of food or medicine. White Hawk approached, representing the tribal council. "Your son has led well in your absence," he told Thomas. "But many feared we had lost you." Thomas clasped the elder's hand. "It will take more than this to stop our fight." As the crowd dispersed, Joseph updated Thomas on developments. Federal surveyors had arrived but were keeping their distance, documenting the operation from afar. A reporter from a Phoenix newspaper had visited, asking pointed questions about the government's actions. Most significantly, Dr. Hayes had secretly returned under cover of darkness, bringing copies of his official reports and a letter of support he'd submitted to scientific journals back east. "He risked his position," Joseph explained, "said he couldn't stand by while scientific truth was buried for political purposes." Thomas nodded appreciatively. "And the ancient map?" Emma brought forth his journal, where she'd been documenting their case. "I've been researching similar cases involving indigenous knowledge. There's precedent from a mining dispute in Nevada where ancestral maps were recognized as evidence of prior claim." As Thomas recovered over the following days, his strength returning gradually, he reviewed their legal strategy. The discovery of the hidden deed clause and the ancestral map had changed their approach entirely. "We don't just fight for ownership now," he explained to Joseph and Emma as they sat planning. "We prove deliberate deception by government agents and ancestral knowledge of the resource." Joseph nodded. "A public fight rather than a private one." "Exactly," Thomas confirmed. "They expected legal maneuvers in territorial court, where they control the judges. Instead, we take this to newspapers, to Washington if necessary." Emma had been cultivating contacts with sympathetic journalists. The San Francisco Chronicle has expressed interest in the story. They're sending a reporter next week. Thomas's recovery accelerated as his sense of purpose returned. Though still weakened, he began taking short walks, receiving visitors, reviewing documents. The tribal healer warned against overexertion, but Thomas felt time pressing against them. One evening, as sunset painted the desert in gold and crimson, Emma joined Thomas on the porch. She'd been writing letters to Eastern contacts, former colleagues of her late husband who might apply pressure in Washington. "Your color is better," she observed, studying his face with unguarded concern. Thomas nodded. Each day brings more strength. A comfortable silence settled between them, the kind possible only between people who had moved beyond mere alliance to something deeper. "I've been dismissed from the school," Emma said finally. "The board made it official yesterday." Thomas frowned. "Because of us? Because of me?" "Because I chose justice over convenience," Emma corrected gently. "It was my choice, Thomas." He studied her in the fading light, this woman who had sacrificed her position and standing for a cause not originally her own. "What will you do?" Emma smiled. a quiet determination in her expression. Exactly what I'm doing now. Fight alongside you until we win. The simple declaration hung in the air between them, laden with meaning beyond the words themselves. Thomas reached out slowly, his hand finding hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. "Emma," he began, uncertain how to express the feelings that had grown between them. She squeezed his hand gently. "I know," she said softly. "I feel it too." Before Thomas could respond, Joseph approached, his expression troubled. "Riders coming. A lot of them." Thomas struggled to his feet, Emma supporting him. In the distance, a cloud of dust marked the approach of at least 20 mounted men. "Get everyone ready," Thomas instructed, his voice finding its old strength. "This isn't a social call." The riders approached in a deliberate formation that Thomas recognized from his army days. Not a random group, but an organized force. Joseph positioned armed men strategically around the village, while women and children moved to the central buildings. "Federal marshals," Emma said, identifying the lead riders' badges as they drew closer. Thomas nodded grimly, with Harding and Simmons right behind them. The marshal in charge, a weathered man named Collins, reined in his horse and surveyed the scene. His expression betrayed nothing as he unfolded an official document. "Thomas Running Water," he called formally. "I have an eviction order signed by the territorial judge. All persons are to vacate this property within 24 hours. Thomas stepped forward, leaning on a walking stick. "On what grounds?" "Violation of federal mineral extraction laws and breach of deed covenants," Collins replied mechanically. From behind the marshals, Simmons smirked. "The law is clear, Running Water. This land has reverted to federal control." Thomas remained calm. "We have filed a petition challenging the hidden clauses in the deed. Clauses never properly translated or explained." "That's for the courts to decide," Collins replied. "Meanwhile, the eviction stands." Thomas gestured toward the families gathered behind him. "These are Apache people on Apache land. By what right do you remove them?" Collins shifted uncomfortably. "My orders come from the territorial governor. I'm just doing my job." "A job that requires you to force women and children from their homes?" Emma challenged, stepping beside Thomas. The marshal's discomfort grew as she continued. "Are you aware this case has drawn attention from national newspapers? That the San Francisco Chronicle is sending a reporter to document your actions?" This was a calculated exaggeration. The reporter wasn't due for days, but the effect was immediate. Collins glanced at his men, clearly reconsidering his approach. 24 hours, he repeated, though with less conviction. "We'll return tomorrow at noon." As the marshals departed, Harding lingered, his expression darkening as he surveyed the growing Apache encampment. "This changes nothing, Running Water. You're finished here." "We'll see," Thomas replied evenly. After the riders disappeared, Joseph exhaled tensely. "Tomorrow, then?" Thomas nodded. "We have until noon to prepare. Emma, send telegrams to every newspaper contact you have. Joseph, gather the council. We need everyone united." That evening, the tribal council convened in the largest dwelling. Thomas, supported by Emma, addressed the assembled elders and family representatives. "Tomorrow they will try to remove us by force," he stated plainly. "We have 3 choices. Leave peacefully, resist physically, or make our stand legally and publicly." Debate followed, sometimes heated. Some advocated armed resistance, others feared government reprisal against the entire reservation. "What chance do we have in white courts?" Black Kettle demanded. "Their laws are weapons against us." "Sometimes," Thomas acknowledged, "but they can also be shields. If we make this public enough, they must at least pretend to follow their own rules." In the end, the council reached consensus. They would not leave, nor would they initiate violence. They would stand their ground peacefully, forcing the marshals to physically remove women, children, and elders, actions that would look barbaric to outside observers. As the meeting concluded, White Hawk approached Thomas, carrying a wooden staff decorated with eagle feathers and intricate carvings. "This belonged to Chief Victorio," the elder explained. "It has been passed to those who must lead in difficult times." Thomas recognized the ceremonial staff, a symbol of tribal leadership rarely seen since the reservation system began. "I cannot accept this," he protested. "I am not a chief." "You lead our fight," White Hawk insisted. "Not just for oil or money, but for our right to determine our own future." With profound humility, Thomas accepted the staff, feeling its weight, physical and symbolic, in his hands. Later, as preparations continued into the night, Emma found Thomas alone, writing in his journal by lamplight. "What are you recording?" she asked. "Everything," he replied. "Our claims, our evidence, the history of this place. In case." He left the thought unfinished. Emma understood. "In case you're not here to tell it yourself." Thomas nodded. "My heart may betray me again. Joseph must know everything." Emma placed her hand over his. "You're not facing this alone, Thomas." In the privacy of the moment, Thomas finally voiced what had been growing between them. "Emma, if circumstances were different, if I were not Apache and you not white, if we were not facing what tomorrow brings, I would ask you to walk beside me for whatever years remain to me." Emma's eyes shone in the lamplight. "I already am walking beside you, Thomas Running Water. And I will continue to do so, regardless of what others think." Their fingers intertwined, bridging cultural divides that seemed suddenly insignificant compared to the connection they shared. Dawn broke with tense anticipation. Thomas, wearing traditional Apache clothing and carrying the ceremonial staff, gathered everyone for final instructions. "No weapons visible," he ordered. "Elders and children in front. We present ourselves with dignity, not as criminals or aggressors." Joseph organized the men, positioning them strategically but unarmed. "If they use force, we do not resist physically. Remember, witnesses are watching." This was true. Emma had arranged for a local photographer to be present, along with a sympathetic trader who wrote occasional pieces for Eastern papers. As noon approached, Thomas stood at the village entrance, the ceremonial staff planted firmly beside him. Emma and Joseph flanked him, with tribal elders, women, and children arrayed behind in a powerful visual statement. The sun reached its zenith. In the distance, dust clouds announced the marshal's return. "Whatever happens," Thomas told Joseph quietly, "remember that we fought with honor." "We're not finished fighting yet, Father," Joseph replied with fierce determination. The riders appeared on the horizon, more numerous than before. The moment of confrontation had arrived. The marshal's party had grown to include a territorial judge, several court clerks, and, most surprisingly, a man in an expensive Eastern suit whom Thomas recognized as a representative from the Department of the Interior. Mason Harding and Walter Simmons rode with them, barely concealing their anticipation. Marshal Collins approached alone, his discomfort evident as he faced the dignified assembly of Apache families. "Mr. Running Water," he began formally, "Judge Williams will hear your objections before the eviction proceeds." This unexpected development caused a stir. Thomas exchanged glances with Emma, who whispered, "They're worried about public perception. This gives them the appearance of fairness." The territorial judge, a thin man with calculating eyes, established an impromptu court on a folding table beneath a canvas awning. A clerk recorded the proceedings in the official ledger as curious onlookers gathered. "This is highly irregular," Judge Williams began, "but given the unique circumstances, I will hear brief arguments regarding the eviction order." Thomas stepped forward, ceremonial staff in hand. "Your Honor, we challenge the legality of the eviction on 3 grounds. His voice, though weakened by illness, carried quiet authority. The photographer Emma had arranged positioned his camera, documenting the historic moment. "First, the deed contained hidden clauses never translated to me, constituting fraud. Second, these clauses were inserted specifically to enable seizure of land if resources were discovered, showing premeditated deception by government agents. Third, we present evidence of ancestral knowledge and stewardship of the oil deposits, predating any territorial claims." The judge's eyebrows rose at this last point. "Evidence," Emma stepped forward with the ancient map and Dr. Hayes's sworn statement regarding its authenticity and correlation with modern geological findings. This map, created by Mr. Running Water's ancestors, clearly shows both water and oil deposits beneath this land, Emma explained. It proves Apache knowledge and deliberate protection of these resources long before territorial government existed. The Interior Department representative leaned forward with interest while Simmons shifted nervously. Furthermore, Thomas continued, I propose a solution that serves all interests. This caught everyone's attention. Even Harding looked surprised. I suggest creating the Apache Oil Trust, a cooperative enterprise between the Apache Nation and the federal government. The tribe maintains land ownership and receives primary proceeds, while the government provides technical assistance and regulatory oversight. The judge frowned. There's no precedent for such an arrangement. Then we create one, Thomas replied simply. Is that not how law evolves? The Interior representative whispered something to the judge, who nodded thoughtfully. I'll need time to consider these arguments, Williams announced. The eviction is suspended for 48 hours pending my decision. Harding exploded. This is absurd. The law is clear. Silence, the judge snapped. This court will reconvene here in 2 days. As the official party withdrew, Thomas could see Harding and Simmons arguing heatedly with the judge. The unexpected delay had clearly disrupted their plans. Joseph approached his father, concern evident. What just happened? Politics, Thomas replied. The Interior Department man doesn't want a public confrontation that might embarrass Washington. Emma nodded. Our strategy is working. Making this public forces them to at least pretend to follow due process. The 48-hour reprieve brought both hope and increased tension. More Apache families arrived to show support, and several neighboring tribes sent representatives. The encampment grew, becoming a powerful visual statement of indigenous solidarity. Emma used the time to draft detailed proposals for the Apache Oil Trust, drawing on her late husband's knowledge of Eastern business structures. Joseph organized expanded security as rumors circulated of Harding's men gathering in Coopersville. The evening before the judge's ruling, Thomas stood at the ceremonial well where their journey had begun. The oil seep had grown, with more black gold emerging daily, a blessing still carrying the shadow of a curse. Dr. Hayes joined him, having returned despite orders to stay away. Whatever happens tomorrow, your discovery has scientific importance, the geologist said. I've documented everything in reports that can't be buried or ignored. Thomas appreciated the man's integrity. Thank you for standing with truth. Truth is my only master, Hayes replied simply. That night, Thomas gathered everyone around the central fire. Tomorrow will decide much, he told them. But remember, whatever the judge rules, the land remembers who truly belongs to it. He used the ceremonial staff to draw a circle in the earth. Our ancestors protected this place with stories of curses because they knew its true value. Whether the papers say it belongs to us or not, we belong to it. As darkness fell, Thomas sought Emma. They walked together under the stars, their path lit by moonlight. Are you ready for tomorrow? She asked. As ready as possible, he replied. The legal arguments are strong, but the politics are uncertain. Emma took his hand. Whatever happens, this fight has already changed things. You've shown that Apache rights can be defended using their own legal system. Thomas stopped, turning to face her. And you've shown that not all who come from the east bring only broken promises. In the silver moonlight, the barriers of culture and convention seemed to fade. Thomas gently touched Emma's cheek, and she leaned into his hand, their connection transcending the conflicts surrounding them. If we succeed, Thomas said softly, there will be opposition to us to this. He gestured between them. There already is, Emma replied with a small smile. That hasn't stopped me yet. Their quiet moment was interrupted by urgent footsteps. Joseph approached, his expression tense. Riders spotted heading toward Coopersville, he reported. Montgomery's carriage among them. Thomas nodded. Last-minute negotiations. They're preparing for all possibilities. As must we, Emma added. As dawn approached, Thomas finally slept, his dreams filled with flowing oil and ancient voices. Tomorrow would bring either victory or defeat, but either way, nothing would be the same again. The makeshift courtyard filled early, Apache families on one side, government officials and interested parties on the other. The photographer positioned his equipment prominently, a reminder that this proceeding would be documented for wider audiences. Thomas noted with interest that several newspaper correspondents had arrived, including one from the San Francisco Chronicle. Emma's network had delivered. Judge Williams took his place at the portable bench, the court ledger open before him. His expression was unreadable as he called the proceedings to order. After reviewing the evidence and arguments, "I'm prepared to rule on the matter of eviction and contested ownership," he announced. Thomas stood tall despite his weakened condition, the ceremonial staff in hand. Emma and Joseph flanked him, a united front before the power of territorial law. "This case presents unusual complexities," Williams continued. "The claim of fraudulent deed clauses is concerning, as is evidence of ancestral knowledge predating territorial governance." Walter Simmons shifted nervously while Mason Harding's face darkened. Thomas maintained his dignified composure, years of hiding emotions before white authorities serving him well. However, the judge continued, "Federal mineral rights policy is clear. Valuable resources on former reservation lands fall under government jurisdiction for the proper management and development of national assets." Thomas felt Emma tense beside him. This was the expected outcome, legal language disguising simple theft. The judge raised his hand for silence as murmurs spread through the crowd. "That said, I find the proposal for an Apache oil trust intriguing and potentially within existing legal frameworks, if properly structured." This unexpected turn silenced everyone. The judge continued, "I therefore rule as follows. The eviction order is suspended pending creation of a formal trust agreement. Mr. Running Water and tribal representatives will retain residency rights while negotiating terms with the Department of the Interior." He banged his gavel. "The court appoints a 3-person commission to draft the agreement. 1 tribal representative, 1 government appointee, and 1 independent expert." Harding surged to his feet. "This is outrageous. The law clearly states." "The law states what I interpret it to state, Mr. Harding," the judge interrupted coldly. "Unless you're now a member of the territorial bar?" As Harding sputtered, Preston Montgomery approached the bench. "Your Honor, Western Consolidated Oil has existing development rights negotiated with the Territorial Office. Those arrangements were premature and are hereby suspended," Williams replied firmly. "All development rights will be determined by the final trust agreement." Thomas studied the judge carefully. Something had changed overnight. Political calculations had shifted. The Interior Department representative nodded with satisfaction, suggesting federal interests had intervened against local corruption. As the court adjourned, the crowd's reaction was mixed. Confusion, relief, cautious celebration. Thomas understood this was neither complete victory nor defeat, but an unexpected third path. "What just happened?" Joseph asked, echoing the question on many minds. "Politics," Emma replied quietly. "Washington doesn't want a public relations disaster with Apache families forcibly removed while the Eastern papers watch." Thomas nodded agreement. "And they've recognized that partnership may be more profitable than conflict. A trust agreement gives them involvement without the stain of outright theft." As the crowd dispersed, Thomas was surprised to see Preston Montgomery approaching. "An interesting outcome, Mr. Running Water," the oil man said. "Perhaps we can discuss where Western Consolidated might fit into this new arrangement." "Perhaps," Thomas replied non-committally. "But any agreement will benefit all Apache people, not just outside interests." Montgomery smiled thinly. "Of course, business thrives on mutual benefit." After he departed, Thomas spotted Mason Harding confronting the judge near the marshal's horses. Their heated exchange ended with Harding storming toward his own mount, face contorted with rage. "He's not finished," Joseph observed. "No," Thomas agreed. "This ruling threatens everything he's built through corruption." The celebration in the Apache camp that evening was cautious but genuine. The immediate threat of eviction had passed, and for the first time, their legal right to negotiate was recognized. Thomas addressed the gathered families, tempering optimism with realism. Today we gain time and recognition, not final victory. The path ahead remains difficult. White Hawk nodded agreement. The white man's paper promises have failed us before. True, Thomas acknowledged. But this time we have leverage, the oil they want so badly and witnesses watching. He gestured toward the newspaper correspondents interviewing people around the camp. As the gathering continued, Thomas noticed Emma in conversation with the Interior Department representative. She approached afterward, her expression thoughtful. Washington has taken interest directly, she reported. The secretary himself apparently intervened after receiving telegrams about our situation. From your contacts? Thomas asked. Emma smiled. Some, but also from Dr. Hayes and others who believe in fair treatment. Public opinion is turning against the corrupt territorial system. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion at the camp's edge. Joseph ran toward them, his expression urgent. Fire in Coopersville. The schoolhouse and newspaper office are burning. From their elevated position, they could see orange flames in the distance. Emma gasped. My research, all our documents. Harding, Thomas said grimly, destroying evidence of corruption, and our legal preparations. As men organized to help fight the fire, Thomas felt a familiar pain in his chest. He leaned heavily on the staff, fighting to remain upright. Emma noticed immediately. Thomas, you need to rest. There's no time, he insisted, though the pain intensified. This is Harding's countermove. Before Emma could respond, a young Apache rider galloped into camp. Armed men at the north boundary. They're setting fire to the outer dwellings. The celebration transformed instantly into crisis. As families grabbed what they could and moved toward the center of the village, Thomas made a decision. Joseph, organize our defenses. Emma, gather the legal documents we still have. I'll find the judge. Despite his weakened state, Thomas mounted his horse. This wasn't over, it had merely entered a new phase. As he rode toward the marshal's camp, he clutched the ceremonial staff, drawing strength from generations of Apache leaders who had faced seemingly impossible odds. Behind him, flames began to spread across the land everyone had once called cursed. 6 months later, Thomas stood before the newly constructed schoolhouse, admiring its solid timber frame and large windows. Children's voices drifted from inside. Apache children learning in their own community, on their own terms. The night of Harding's attack had become legendary across the territory. Thomas had reached the marshal's camp just as the violence escalated, finding Judge Williams already mounting a response. The federal marshals, bound by oath to uphold law rather than serve corruption, had ridden to confront Harding's men. What followed was brief but decisive. Caught red-handed committing arson and assault, with federal witnesses present, Harding and his hired guns faced immediate arrest. His desperate attempt to shoot his way free had ended with Harding wounded and in custody, his power broken. The incident transformed public opinion entirely. Newspaper headlines across the country condemned the savage attack on peaceful Apache village, with accompanying photographs documenting the aftermath. Telegrams flooded the territorial governor's office demanding justice. Within weeks, Walter Simmons had been removed as Indian agent, replaced by a younger, reform-minded man named Charles Porter. The Apache Oil Trust had been formalized with terms far more favorable than initially expected. The tribe retained full land ownership and received 60% of proceeds, with 40% directed to infrastructure development and government oversight. Admiring your handiwork? Emma's voice broke Thomas from his reverie. She joined him, linking her arm through his, as they surveyed the village that had transformed from abandoned ruins to a thriving community. Our handiwork, Thomas corrected gently. They walked together through what locals now called New Springs, named for the water wells that once again provided clean water throughout the community. Oil derricks operated in the distance, carefully positioned away from living areas, managed by a combination of Apache workers and technical experts from Eastern companies. The ceremonial well where everything had begun remained untouched, protected as sacred ground. Each month, Thomas led a blessing ceremony there, honoring ancestors who had preserved the resource through generations. "The hospital foundation is finished," Emma reported as they walked. "The doctor from Tucson will arrive next month to help establish proper medical services." Thomas nodded with satisfaction. The changes were coming rapidly, but in a controlled manner that respected Apache traditions while embracing necessary modernization. Joseph approached, now officially the operations manager of the Apache Oil Trust. At 28, he had grown into a natural leader, respected by both the tribal community and the business representatives. "The tribal council meeting is about to begin," he reminded Thomas. "They're voting on the expanded education program today." Thomas smiled. The council now met in a proper building rather than under a tree, but maintained traditional protocols alongside modern governance structures. This balance, honoring the old ways while adapting to new realities, had become the hallmark of their success. As they walked toward the council house, Thomas reflected on the personal changes these months had brought. His health had stabilized with proper medical care, though he knew his heart remained damaged. He had stepped back from day-to-day management, focusing instead on elder advisory roles and cultural preservation. And then there was Emma. Their relationship had faced opposition from both communities initially, an Apache man and a white woman challenging deeply entrenched taboos. Yet their quiet dignity and shared vision had gradually won acceptance, if not universal approval. 2 months ago, they had married in a ceremony that blended Apache traditions with Christian elements, symbolizing their personal union and the community's new path. Emma now directed the expanded school system, incorporating Apache language and cultural education alongside standard curriculum. The council meeting addressed practical matters, water distribution improvements, healthcare services, scholarship programs for promising students to attend Eastern universities. Thomas contributed when appropriate but took satisfaction in watching younger leaders like Joseph take initiative. When the meeting concluded, Thomas walked with Emma to their home, a comfortable dwelling that combined traditional elements with modern conveniences. Unlike the opulent mansions some oil barons built, they had chosen modest comfort, believing the wealth belonged primarily to the community. On their porch sat Dr. Hayes, who had become a regular visitor and advisor. The geologist had resigned his government position after the controversy, finding more satisfying work as an independent consultant to the Apache Oil Trust. "The latest production figures," Hayes announced, handing Thomas a document. "The field is performing beyond all projections. At current rates, the trust fund will exceed $1 million by year's end." Thomas nodded, the numbers both impressive and somewhat abstract. More meaningful to him were the tangible improvements in daily life. Children with full bellies, elders receiving proper care, young people with genuine opportunities. "Washington is watching your model closely," Hayes continued. "There's talk of applying similar approaches on other reservations with valuable resources." "They should be watching," Emma said firmly. "This proves what's possible when indigenous rights are respected rather than exploited." As sunset painted the desert gold, Thomas gazed across the community that had grown from a supposedly cursed plot of land. The curse had become a blessing indeed, not just through oil wealth, but through the transformation of relationships and possibility. Thomas sat beneath the old cottonwood tree, watching young Apache children play a traditional game their grandparents had feared might be forgotten. The sound of their laughter carried on the warm breeze, mingling with construction noises from the expanding community center. The tribal council meeting had just concluded, with the adoption of a new governing charter that balanced traditional leadership with modern business practices. The document represented months of careful deliberation, incorporating wisdom from elders with innovations from younger members who had received education beyond the reservation. Emma joined him, a stack of student essays in her hands. Her school now employed 3 additional teachers, including a young Apache woman who had returned from education in California specifically to help her community. "What are you thinking about?" Emma asked, noting Thomas's contemplative expression. "How quickly things change," he replied. 1 year ago, this was cursed land that no one wanted. Now delegations from Washington and other tribes come to study what we've built. Indeed, their success had drawn attention far beyond the territory. The Apache Oil Trust had become a case study in indigenous resource management, challenging long-held assumptions about federal control of reservation assets. Joseph approached, accompanied by the new Indian agent, Charles Porter, a reform-minded man who had embraced partnership rather than paternalism. "The irrigation project is ahead of schedule," Joseph reported. "By next spring, we'll have water flowing to the eastern fields." Porter nodded. The department is impressed with how efficiently funds are being utilized. They're considering similar models for the Navajo coal deposits. Thomas appreciated the progress but remained realistic. Their success, while significant, was still an exception in a system designed for indigenous dispossession. One community's victory didn't erase the broader injustices, but it did provide a template for change. Later that afternoon, Thomas visited Mason Harding in the territorial prison, a monthly ritual that puzzled many but felt necessary to Thomas. The once powerful rancher had aged dramatically, his arrogance replaced by smoldering resentment. "Come to gloat again?" Harding muttered as Thomas took a seat across from him. "No," Thomas replied evenly. "I come to remind both of us what happens when greed overtakes humanity." Harding scoffed. "Save your Apache wisdom for someone who cares. You got lucky, that's all." Thomas didn't argue. These visits weren't about changing Harding but about reinforcing Thomas's own commitment to justice rather than vengeance. The land had been wronged by men like Harding for generations. Healing required more than simply shifting who held power. That evening, a ceremony honored the anniversary of the oil discovery. The entire community gathered around the ceremonial well, now preserved as sacred ground. Thomas, wearing traditional regalia and carrying the leadership staff, spoke about the journey from curse to blessing. "Our ancestors sealed this well and created stories of curses not from fear, but from wisdom," he explained to the gathered families. They knew the black water would bring either great benefit or great destruction, depending on how it was used and who controlled it. He gestured toward the controlled derricks operating in the distance. "They waited for the right time, when we could protect what was ours and use it for healing rather than division." As night fell, traditional dancing began around the central fire. Thomas watched with satisfaction as young people performed steps their great-grandparents had practiced, connecting past and future in an unbroken line. Emma stood beside him, her hand in his. "You've changed history," she said softly. Thomas shook his head. "We've restored what should have been. There's a difference." Later, walking back to their home under star-filled skies, Thomas paused at the edge of what had once been abandoned ruins. Now, neat buildings lined organized streets, oil lamps glowing in windows. "When I first came here," he told Emma, "I heard my grandfather's voice in the wind, telling me to trust what couldn't be seen. And now?" she asked. "Now I see his vision made real. Not just oil wealth, but Apache people determining their own future." He smiled slightly, though I doubt even he imagined an Apache oil company managed by his grandson and guided by a schoolteacher from Boston. Emma laughed softly. "Life finds unexpected paths." Thomas nodded, feeling the familiar tightness in his chest that came more frequently now. Dr. Burke from Tucson had been honest about his prognosis. The heart damage was permanent and progressive. He might have years or months, but not decades. This knowledge brought clarity rather than fear. Thomas had accomplished what he'd been called to do. The community would continue growing under Joseph's capable leadership and Emma's steady guidance. The cursed land had transformed into blessed ground that would nurture generations to come. As they reached their home, Thomas looked back at the village, at children who would never know hunger as he had, at elders receiving proper care, at young people with genuine opportunities. The oil would eventually run dry, but the structures and systems they'd built would endure. Some would call it ironic, Thomas mused, that the same black gold that built Eastern fortunes is now building Apache futures. "Not irony," Emma corrected gently. "Justice." Thomas nodded, his hand finding hers as they stood together under the vast desert sky. The land that everyone had once abandoned as worthless had revealed its true value. Not just in oil, but in the community it had helped resurrect. The curse had become a blessing. The forgotten place had found its purpose, and Thomas Running Water, once mocked for accepting cursed land, had transformed not just a village but the very narrative of what was possible for his people. Long before Thomas Running Water claimed the cursed village, he had walked between worlds. At 19, he had joined the U.S. Army as a scout, believing he could protect his people by helping soldiers better understand the territory. His grandfather's ceremonial pipe, passed down through generations, had traveled with him, a connection to the traditions he feared might be lost. For 8 years, Thomas guided blue-coated soldiers through Apache lands, teaching them survival skills while secretly marking safe passages for his own people. His commanders valued his tracking abilities but never fully trusted him. His own tribe viewed his army connections with suspicion. He belonged nowhere completely. During this time, Thomas witnessed the systematic displacement of Apache bands. Villages relocated at gunpoint, hunting grounds declared off-limits, children sent to distant schools. The peace he helped facilitate came at a devastating price. The breaking point came at Oak Creek, where Thomas's unit encountered a small Apache settlement. Despite his assurances that these were peaceful families, the commander ordered their immediate removal to the reservation. When an elderly man resisted, soldiers beat him severely. Thomas intervened, his carefully maintained composure shattering. He was arrested, charged with insubordination, and would have faced military prison if not for a sympathetic lieutenant who arranged his discharge instead. Returning to the reservation, Thomas found conditions worse than when he'd left. Government rations were inconsistent and inadequate. Clean water was scarce. Diseases spread through crowded living quarters. The proud Apache had become dependent on the same system steadily destroying them. Thomas married Emma Flower in Snow, a woman whose quiet strength matched his own. Together they worked to improve reservation conditions, using Thomas's knowledge of military procedures to file effective complaints and request proper supplies. For a time, they made modest progress. Their son Joseph was born, growing into a bright, questioning child who absorbed both traditional teachings and practical knowledge of the changing world. Then came the influenza that swept through the reservation. With inadequate medical care, many died, including Emma Flower in Snow. Thomas watched helplessly as his wife slipped away, her final words urging him to find another path for our people. Grief-stricken and angry, Thomas redoubled his advocacy efforts, only to encounter increasing resistance from Indian Agent Simmons, newly appointed to manage reservation affairs. Simmons viewed the Apache as obstacles to territorial development rather than people under his care. Their conflict came to a head when Thomas organized a petition demanding the promised school be built. Simmons retaliated by reducing rations further, claiming budget constraints, while selling supplies to local settlers. It was during this dark period that Thomas first encountered Mason Harding, then expanding his ranch operations along reservation borders. Harding had offered to hire Thomas as a ranch hand, a chance for a real job, while making it clear he considered Apache land wasted on people who don't know how to use it properly. Thomas had refused politely but firmly, earning Harding's lasting animosity. Shortly afterward, Harding successfully lobbied for water rights that diverted streams away from reservation lands, worsening the already dire conditions. Over subsequent years, Thomas worked various jobs: breaking horses, transporting goods, occasional translation work, saving every penny toward his dream of establishing an independent livelihood for his family. Joseph, growing into a young man with his mother's intelligence and his father's determination, contributed his wages from the trading post. By 1887, they had accumulated enough for a modest parcel near the river, sufficient land to support a small ranch operation beyond Simmons's direct control. Their future seemed set until Thomas began experiencing vivid dreams of his grandfather, who had passed when Thomas was a teenager. In these dreams, his grandfather led him to an abandoned village, a place the other Apache avoided, believing it cursed. "What others fear may be what saves us," the old man said repeatedly. When Thomas learned this very village was available, the previous Apache inhabitants having been relocated after wells mysteriously failed, he recognized the opportunity from his dreams. Despite Joseph's objections and universal ridicule, Thomas used their savings to acquire the worthless property. The stories about the village were numerous and contradictory. Some said the wells had been poisoned during earlier conflicts with settlers. Others claimed ancient spirits guarded something precious beneath the earth. Most practical minds simply noted the poor soil quality and unreliable water table. What no one discussed openly was how convenient the curse had been for territorial officials, who had used it to justify moving Apache families to an even smaller, more marginal reservation section, freeing up better lands for settlement. Only Thomas's grandfather and a few tribal elders had known the truth, that the village sat atop both water and oil, resources deliberately hidden from white authorities. They had created and perpetuated the curse stories as protection, waiting for the right time and the right person to uncover what had been concealed. Thomas, carrying his grandfather's pipe and guided by dreams he couldn't fully explain, had become that person, stepping willingly into a supposedly cursed future that would transform not just his family's destiny but the possibilities for generations of Apache to come. Thomas Running Water's journey from skeptical army scout to tribal leader embodied the complexities faced by many Apache during this transformative period. His initial belief that working within white systems could protect his people had given way to disillusionment, then to strategic resistance, and finally to a vision of Apache self-determination that neither rejected modernization nor abandoned tradition. The oil discovery had accelerated this evolution. Thomas found himself navigating unfamiliar territories, legal systems, business negotiations, political alliances, while maintaining his core principles. His leadership style blended the patient observation he'd learned as a scout with the moral authority inherited from his grandfather. Perhaps the most profound change was his willingness to trust outsiders like Emma and Dr. Hayes after years of justified suspicion. This openness didn't come easily. Each alliance represented a calculated risk based on careful assessment of character rather than blind faith. Emma's letters to her sister in Boston revealed her own transformation. Her initial correspondence described the primitive conditions and noble savages in language typical of Eastern prejudices. Within months, her perspective shifted dramatically. "I confess my earlier letters reflected shameful ignorance," she wrote. "These people possess sophisticated understanding of this land and its resources that our scientific authorities are only beginning to comprehend. Their governance systems, while different from ours, contain wisdom our own political structures would benefit from adopting." Emma's education extended beyond intellectual appreciation to genuine cultural respect. She learned Apache words and traditions, not as anthropological curiosities but as living practices with continued relevance. Her willingness to stand against her own community's prejudices came at considerable personal cost: professional ostracism, severed friendships, and family concerns about her going native. Joseph's development proved equally significant, though differently expressed. Unlike his father, who had experienced both traditional Apache life and forced adaptation, Joseph had known only the reservation system. His initial resentment toward Thomas's decision to accept cursed land reflected not just practical concerns but deeper anger at their marginalized existence. The oil discovery transformed Joseph from cynical young man to engaged community leader. Working alongside tribal members to develop the oil operation gave him pride in Apache ingenuity. Managing negotiations with outside companies developed his diplomatic skills. Most importantly, seeing his father's vision vindicated healed the breach between them, allowing Joseph to integrate respect for traditional knowledge with necessary modern adaptations. Dr. Franklin Hayes underwent perhaps the most unexpected evolution. Initially approaching the oil field as merely an interesting geological phenomenon, he found himself questioning fundamental assumptions about indigenous capabilities and rights. His scientific training had taught him to follow evidence wherever it led, and the evidence of Apache geological knowledge predating modern science challenged his worldview profoundly. Hayes's decision to resign his government position and work directly with the Apache Oil Trust represented more than career change. It signified moral awakening. His meticulous documentation of the tribe's ancestral knowledge in scientific journals forced the academic establishment to confront its dismissal of indigenous wisdom. Mason Harding's character, by contrast, remained remarkably fixed despite changing circumstances. A Civil War veteran who had fought for the Confederacy, Harding had come west seeking reinvention and found it in land acquisition. His sense of entitlement to territory, to resources, to deference from those he considered inferior, never wavered. Even imprisonment failed to prompt self-reflection. Harding maintained that he had merely played by the rules of territorial expansion, rules that had always favored those bold enough to seize opportunities regardless of who was harmed. His tragedy lay in his inability to recognize that these very rules were changing around him. Walter Simmons represented the entrenched bureaucracy that enabled men like Harding. Neither particularly cruel nor particularly kind, Simmons viewed his role as Indian agent primarily as career advancement. His corruption stemmed less from active malice than from indifference to Apache welfare and unquestioning acceptance of the system's inherent inequities. When scandal forced his removal, Simmons expressed genuine confusion. He had followed established practices, diverting resources and manipulating regulations exactly as his predecessors had done. His replacement by reform-minded Charles Porter signaled shifting attitudes in federal Indian policy that would accelerate in coming decades. The tribal elders, particularly White Hawk, embodied continuity amid change. Their decision to support Thomas reflected not abandonment of tradition but its practical application to new circumstances. In presenting Thomas with the ceremonial leadership staff, they recognized that preserving Apache culture sometimes required innovation rather than rigid adherence to past practices. Even peripheral characters reflected the era's transformative impact. The photographer who documented the confrontation with federal marshals began as a simple businessman seeking marketable images. As he witnessed the Apache community's dignified resistance, he became an advocate, ensuring his photographs portrayed their humanity rather than reinforcing stereotypes. Together, these intersecting journeys illustrated a fundamental truth, that moments of crisis reveal character but also reshape it, offering opportunities for growth or regression depending on each individual's response to challenge and change. At the heart of Thomas Running Water's story lay the restored ceremonial well, a symbol of the complex themes that had unfolded across generations of Apache experience. What began as a source of life-giving water became a guardian of hidden wealth, and ultimately transformed into a testament to cultural resilience and adaptation. The concept of curse as protection represented perhaps the most profound theme. The ancestral decision to seal the well and create deliberately frightening stories illustrated how marginalized peoples sometimes preserve their most valuable resources through misdirection. What appeared to outsiders as superstition often contained deeper strategic wisdom, protecting vital knowledge until it could be safely revealed. This understanding transformed the entire narrative of Apache backwardness that territorial officials had propagated. The supposedly primitive people who didn't properly use their land had actually been sophisticated stewards practicing intergenerational resource management. Their curse stories demonstrated not ignorance but remarkable foresight, recognizing that premature discovery of the oil would have resulted in immediate dispossession. The tension between tradition and progress threaded throughout the community's development decisions. Thomas never advocated returning to pre-reservation life, recognizing such nostalgia as impractical. Yet he equally rejected the false choice between cultural preservation and material improvement that government policies presented as inevitable. Instead, the Apache Oil Trust pioneered a third path, selective modernization guided by traditional values. Schools taught both English and Apache language. Medical facilities incorporated traditional healing practices alongside modern medicine. Housing combined cultural design elements with practical improvements. This integrative approach challenged the prevailing assimilationist philosophy that indigenous advancement required cultural erasure. The transformation of the land itself, from worthless to invaluable, paralleled broader questions about how value is determined and by whom. The territory's economic system had dismissed the parched village as having no worth because it lacked obvious agricultural potential or visible resources. This narrow assessment ignored both the hidden oil wealth and the cultural significance the location held for Apache people. This theme extended to human valuation as well. Thomas, Emma, Joseph, and others deemed marginal by territorial society. An aging Apache man, a widowed schoolteacher, a frustrated young Indian, proved essential to creating a new economic and social model. Their success challenged prevailing hierarchies based on race, gender, and social position. The legal battles highlighted the dual nature of American law, both as weapon of dispossession and potential tool for justice. The hidden deed clause represented how legal language had historically been weaponized against indigenous communities unable to read English or access legal counsel. Yet Thomas's strategic use of the same legal system, combined with public pressure, demonstrated how marginalized groups could sometimes turn these tools toward protective purposes. This duality appeared throughout the story's institutions. The territorial government both enabled corruption and eventually provided framework for the Apache Oil Trust. Christian missionaries had supported both cultural suppression and educational opportunity. The U.S. Army had forcibly relocated Apache people, yet employed Thomas as a scout. This complex interplay rejected simplistic narratives of heroes and villains, highlighting instead how individuals made moral choices within flawed systems. Water as life-giver recurred symbolically throughout, from the initial well digging to the irrigation projects funded by oil wealth. In the arid Southwest, water represented not just physical survival but community viability. The restoration of reliable water sources through oil proceeds completed a circle. What lay beneath the earth had always been precious, whether life-sustaining water or wealth-generating oil. Cross-cultural relationships, particularly between Thomas and Emma, embodied both the possibility and complexity of bridging divided worlds. Their partnership developed not through romantic idealization but through shared values and complementary knowledge. Emma never positioned herself as a white savior, nor did Thomas approach her from a position of cultural superiority. Instead, they built mutual respect through practical collaboration before deeper feelings emerged. Stewardship versus ownership emerged as a fundamental distinction between Apache and European American worldviews. Thomas never spoke of owning the oil in the possessive sense common to American capitalism. Instead, he consistently described himself as responsible for protecting resources that belonged to the community and future generations. This conceptual framework influenced every aspect of the trust's development, from profit distribution to environmental practices. Perhaps most significantly, the story explored how healing from historical trauma required not just acknowledgement of past wrongs, but creation of new possibilities. The Apache community's collective wound from displacement and discrimination couldn't be erased, but the oil discovery created opportunity to build strengthened infrastructure, educational systems, and economic self-determination. The community well, once sealed to protect secrets, now reopened to sustain future generations, stood as testament to this journey from necessary concealment to confident visibility. Water flowed again where it had been deliberately stopped, symbolizing the restoration of not just physical resources but cultural continuity and pride. As children played around the well that their great-grandparents had hidden and their grandparents had feared, they embodied the story's ultimate theme, that preserving the past sometimes requires strategic patience and careful stewardship, waiting for the moment when ancient wisdom can safely emerge to create previously unimagined futures.